Welcome to Pope's Plates. I'm Lisa, and today we're continuing our series on soup. The soup today is Hungarian goulash. Now actually, Hungarian goulash can be both a soup and a stew depending upon how much liquid you use and how much beef or potatoes. Ours is a soup. The first thing we're going to do is to get the onions chopped and ready to go in the pot, and then I'll be cutting the stew beef into smaller pieces so that it cooks more quickly. I'm just gonna put the trash pieces of onion over here on the board, get rid of them a little bit. These are pretty small onions, but I think enough for us to have for our soup today. The onions will actually do a little bit of cooking before we put the beef in the pot. That's why I'm cutting them up first. I'm moving the onions to the side so that I can cut the pieces of stew beef. They're already cubed, but if you see the size of the meat, it's a little big. So I want to cut this at least in half. Some of the bigger pieces I may cut in thirds, just to make sure that they're not too big, because while the soup will cook for an hour, maybe more, the smaller the pieces are, the more easily they are to tenderize as they cook. You'll notice that I'm cutting this meat on the same cutting board that I cut the onions on. I'm very careful to wash the cutting board off with antibacterial detergent to make sure that any residue of the meat is gone. I kind of scrub it with a little scrubber. I'm going to clean up my work surface here, and then we're going to start the onions in our pot. We're ready to start the onions. We're using 3 tablespoons of butter dropped into our pot, which is being heated. I'm going to let that butter melt before I add the onion. Shouldn't take too long to let this melt. It's already sizzling a little bit, so you don't want the butter to brown overly much. I'm going to go ahead and add the onions and let them start cooking. We're not adding the meat right now, remember. We want the onions to cook a little bit before we add the meat. We will, however, add spices to the mix before the meat goes in and browns. To thicken the soup, we need to add a dusting of seasoned flour. And my seasoned flour is kept in a pot in my pantry all the time. It includes all-purpose flour, salt, pepper, and some sweet paprika. I'm going to take about 2 tablespoons of flour and kind of sprinkle it over the meat. And then to coat it, I'm going to use my fingers. Now, I'm still damaged here, so I think I'm just going to use my right hand. What you want is for each piece of meat to have a little bit of flour on it, so that as it cooks, it begins the process of thickening the sauce. We'll let the onions cook for a little bit longer before we add the meat. The onions have had a little bit of time to cook. Some of them are translucent. The bigger pieces are not quite there yet, but that's okay. Remember, this soup is going to cook for a long time. I'm adding the meat now that's been coated in the seasoned flour. To brown this appropriately, I'm going to turn the heat up just a little bit. You got a little bit more fire underneath. The beef has been browned on all sides. Now we're going to add the spices. We add a half teaspoon of salt. We add about 3/4 of a teaspoon of marjoram, which is a little unusual spice. And we're adding 2 tablespoons of paprika. Now I've used about a half a tablespoon of hot paprika because I like my soup a little spicier, and 1.5 tablespoons of sweet paprika. We're going to let this cook for just a minute. Let me show you what this looks like and how it has colored the soup. Cooking the paprika takes a little bit of the harshness of the flavor out. But you just let this cook for a minute or two. I think we're good. Now we're going to add 4 cups of beef broth to the soup. We'll blub blub. That makes interesting noises. All right, we're going to stir this around. We're going to let it come to heat, not to a full boil. We're going to leave the heat right where it is until we see that it's beginning to bubble just a little bit. Then we're going to turn the heat to simmer and let it cook for an hour before we add the potatoes. This soup has been cooking now for close to an hour. We are going to add potatoes now. I used canned potatoes, 2 cans of diced potatoes. You can use fresh ones that you've peeled if you like. The canned potatoes really hold up beautifully, and they will absorb the flavor of the meat. These are small diced potatoes. Add them carefully so this doesn't jump up and bite you. Maybe a couple of them stuck there in the bottom. The potatoes are drained before I put them in the soup. Again, that all came out. The potatoes will stay in here for another maybe 15-20 minutes. That lets the flavors from the meat, the onions, and the paprika get into the potatoes. You do have a choice too here if you wanted to at the end to mash some of these potatoes, and that would give it a little bit more stewy technique, maybe texture, not technique, texture. I like it soupy, so I'm not going to do that, but we're going to let this come back to a boil. We'll let it sit on the stove, and when it's completely ready, we'll have a bite. Our soup is finished. It's been cooking for a good while. We've got really good chunks of meat and potato. You can see the onion. We're going to serve it into a bowl. Naturally made a mess, dropped it on the counter. I like to add just a dollop of sour cream to my soup. Makes it look pretty and makes it taste beautiful. Well, look for me. All right, I have served the soup, added a little dollop of sour cream, which is what I like best. If you like this recipe, please comment in the box below. We invite you to subscribe to our channel. We have others in the series of soup recipes that will be linked so that you can watch the sausage tortellini and the zucchini soup as well. Until we see you again, let's keep cooking.